Greetings, 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 greetings. Good morning. How y'all doing? I hope you're listening to Rootwork. Is this thing on? You know, it takes me a while sometimes to get it together. So I have to check. I have to recheck and recheck. If you're listening, if you can hear me, and if you can see me, this is Rootwork here on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM San Diego, 99.5 FM Ridgecrest, China Lake, streaming all over the world at kpfk.org. And if you're joining us from YouTube on the Black Liberation Media platform or the Rootwork channel, please welcome. Come on in, like, share, subscribe. You know what to do. I shouldn't have to keep telling y'all this, but alas, here we are. Like, share, and subscribe. Please, pretty please. Again, come on in, have a seat, and let's get down to it. There have been numerous postmortems, think pieces, and even a few spaces for grieving from the election on November 6th. And as you know, in many areas throughout the country, the down ballot races can be just as important, if not more so, than the election for the presidency. Here in California, lots of us were left wondering, not just here in California, I'm sure some of y'all in other parts of the country too. We were left wondering if Californians had lost their minds completely or only partially with the fate of two particular ballot initiatives. Proposition 6, which would have removed the language of slavery from the state constitution, and Proposition 36, which would increase penalties for crimes already on the books here in the state, and now quite possibly increase the state's prison population instead of diverting folks to drug rehabilitation programs and other non-carceral alternatives. So I've asked some representatives from two organizations involved in the work around these propositions, La Defensa, based here in Los Angeles, California, and Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, based in San Francisco, to talk with us about why they think these propositions fared the way that they did. Here to speak with me now are representatives of two organizations that fought for the passage of Props 6 and 36 here in California during the most recent election. Shayla Wilson is the Policy and Advocacy Advisor with La Defensa. We also have Kelly Walters, who is a staff attorney with Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. Kelly, Shayla, thank you all so much for being on Rootwork today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all for being here. We appreciate it so much. Now, real quick, before we start talking about these ballot initiatives, Shayla, can you give our audience a quick synopsis of the work that La Defensa does?
Sure. So La Defensa does a number of things in California. We are based in Los Angeles County. We run Court Watch for LA County, which is part of our larger judicial advocacy work. So we also have an app called Rate My Judge, and we ran in the most recent election two candidates who both won their seats for judicial seats in the county. We also do local budget advocacy work for the Reimagine LA Coalition. And I work on our state policy and advocacy work, which included our work on Proposition 36.
All righty. And Kelly, with Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, the KPFK audience should be pretty familiar with the work of that organization through the years, but if you could give us a quick refresher.
Sure. Yeah. No, we've been around for a bit. So we are a nonprofit, and one might say a movement, that is designed to advocate on behalf of currently and formerly incarcerated individuals, and mostly are made up of formerly incarcerated individuals. We engage in policy work and impact litigation. Yeah.
Okay. Now, La Defensa came to my attention because of the work around the Defenders for Justice. That was the movement, the work to get former public defenders elected as judges because of what we call here in Los Angeles, at least, the prosecutor to judge pipeline. Most judges are former prosecutors, therefore, they have a very carceral mindset and approach to justice. Whereas this last go round, two former public defenders, progressive public defenders, were able to be elected as judges to the Los Angeles Superior Court. So that is the work that I'm familiar with in terms of Reimagine LA, La Defensa, et cetera, and so on. But also during this election, you worked around one of the propositions, local, unique to California, but implications for the rest of the country. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, so we supported the campaign to oppose Proposition 36. That did unfortunately pass this election by some pretty steep margins. We're definitely concerned about what this is going to mean for our state, but as you mentioned as well, what implications this might have nationally for justice reform. This is in effect going to repeal some major wins we had about a decade ago through Proposition 47, which really helped us reduce our jail and prison populations and help people rehabilitate and stay in their communities. We're certainly concerned about these impacts.
So according to the Secretary of State's Voter Information Guide, Proposition 36 allows felony charges and increases sentences for certain drug and theft crimes. It was put on the ballot by petition signatures. Allows felony charges for possessing certain drugs and for thefts under $950 if the defendant has 2 prior drug or theft convictions. Basically, Prop 36 came about as a result of quote unquote concern over a lot of these smash and grab thefts. Is that correct?
That's certainly how the issue was framed. Some of the early media around this was from retailers talking about, massive losses in inventory and like the impact of these alleged smash and grabs and how widespread they were. What we know now, to be very clear, is that some of those early studies and claims were walked back on. Much of the loss that retailers experience is throughout the supply chain and not necessarily associated with smash and grabs. But it did certainly, that narrative stuck around and was a primary.
Well, okay, at what point were they walked back? Because all I can remember seeing is roving gangs of youth smashing and grabbing and running.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we did not win the narrative war on this. It was, the supporters of Proposition 36 spent about twice as much money as opponents of it, and were really able to shape the media narrative around that. And though we did our best to combat it, we're unfortunately, I think, unsuccessful on a large scale.
Now, you talked about Proposition 47 also, which was passed 10 years prior, regarding the diversion of individuals impacted by drug abuse, the diversion from the criminal justice system into treatment and rehabilitation. And this Proposition 36 being defeated is now going to negatively impact that process.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sorry. So some of the offenses that are included under Proposition 36 were those that were addressed in Prop 47. Not all of them. There are a number of offenses under Proposition 47 that have not been touched by the passage of Proposition 36. I think, though, one of our concerns is that this is going to suck about $100 million annually out of services that Proposition 47 was able to fund. And so those included substance use, mental health services, housing services, all those things that help keep people out of the criminal legal system. That money is basically going to dry up as a result of Proposition 36 without alternative funding sources.
So if that money is now going to be no longer available, where is it going to go?
Well, someone is going to have to pay for the impact of Proposition 36. And that's certainly likely going to be one of the places it's going to go. Although my understanding is that we don't actually understand the full extent and cost of Proposition 36 and estimate a very heavy impact on counties across the state.
Well, I'm saying if the money is being cut, well, it's just going to go sit in a vault somewhere, or is it going to go to a different agency? Why would someone advocate for this change?
It's a really good question. I think
We don't know. We don't know why. Who put this together? Who were the forces that decided that Prop 36 was a bad idea?
Well, so the opponents to Proposition 36 include La Defensa and many criminal reform advocates.
I'm sorry. That's the opponents.
Yes.
Who were the proponents of Prop 36?
Yes. So the supporters of Proposition 36, the people who brought it to the ballot, include large corporations, private interest groups like Walmart, many of the people who brought forth the claims about smash and grabs, and the people who put basic needs behind glass cabinets throughout our state, locked them up. Those are the people who brought this forth and spent an immense amount of money funding it as well.
So you mentioned that many of the losses were actually in the supply chain. I had a guest on at some point, not earlier this year, last year. He talked about the fact that many of the losses in some of these big box stores were actually employee theft. So we've got employee theft, we've got supply chain issues, and yet these corporations are pushing for laws targeting vulnerable populations. I'm not really understanding why that's happening. Can you give us can you shed some light on that for our audience?
I will be honest, I can't speak entirely to their motivations, and I will, ask if Kelly, might have some insight on this as well. But I will say that there has been a lot of trading of funds between these large big box corporations and the Republican Party and MAGA special interest groups, which do prioritize a tough on crime approach that we know that does not work. And so why Walmart itself might be interested in this, I can't say, but we do know that this is a larger pattern for the Republican Party. And again, MAGA special interests, those right-wing extremists. And so could be larger policies and, lending support to one cause for another. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. I get you elected. We pass your proposals. You maybe reduce some restrictions on my business operating practices. Those are the assumptions I can make.
Mm-hmm. Speaking with Shayla Wilson, who is the policy and advocacy advisor with La Defensa here in Los Angeles. Kelly Walters, staff attorney with Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. You all worked on Proposition 6. You've done a lot of work in a lot of areas, but one of the things that you all did this latest election, you were in support of Proposition 6. And if I can get my life together, there it is. Let's see what we have here.
I can't get my life together. I don't expect you to.
Well, okay. Proposition 6, which went down, as we say, in flames during this past election, would eliminate the constitutional provision, would have eliminated the constitutional provision, that's the state Constitution of California, allowing involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons. Would have been a legislative constitutional amendment, would have amended the California Constitution to remove the current provision that allows jails and prisons to impose involuntary servitude to punish crime, i.e., forcing incarcerated persons to work, i.e., the language that is similar to the United States Constitution in terms of the 13th Amendment.
Yeah, that is correct. We
talk to us about this.
Yeah, so we actually did get what was previously ACA 8 through the legislature this year. We had the number of votes from the legislators to make this a ballot proposition and have it on your ballot as Prop 6. We worked very hard. We were very strong, not only supporters, but sponsors of this. It's frequently called the slavery loophole. If one includes Nevada, I believe there's 7 other states that have amended their constitutions to remove that loophole, to basically remove the language that allows for involuntary servitude or slavery, really, for punishment of a crime. And unfortunately, Californians this year did not agree with those particular states. I should also add that the federal constitution includes the same loophole.
Right, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So now, what are the reasons you all have been able to uncover, or what do you believe? Why do you believe Californians did not feel this was in their interest to pass?
Well, I think there's quite a few reasons. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think there's a few reasons. And one of them, I believe, had a lot to do with the ballot language. If one were to look at the ballot language of Nevada versus the ballot language of California, you can see that the Nevada language, if you'll allow me to read it really quick, is actually very straightforward. It was just whether or not to remove language that authorizes, quote, the use of slavery and involuntary servitude as a criminal punishment from the Nevada Constitution, which is really quite simple. Right. And now if you look at the California language, it's written in an extremely sort of passive way. And I believe there's even a double negative in there. It's very confusing. I had to read it a couple times when I was voting. And I think that this particular way that it was, I hate to point fingers here, but I think the way that this was formulated by the Attorney General really left a lot of people questioning. When we spoke to people afterwards, people said that thought they were voting the opposite way. That if they voted no, that's what would remove the slavery loophole.
Because according to the Secretary of State's office, the supporters of this was Assemblymember Lori Wilson. Mm-hmm. Opponents, none submitted.
Yes, that is correct, which makes it even more painful.
What your vote means. A yes vote on this measure would have meant involuntary servitude would not be allowed as punishment for crime. State prisons would not be allowed to discipline people in prison who refuse to work. No, a no vote on this measure means involuntary servitude would continue to be allowed as punishment for crime. Arguments. Con. No argument against Proposition 6 was submitted, and yet it failed.
Yes. I think a lot had to do with the lack of resources and lack of education with it as well. So to kind of go along with the language issue, this is a grassroots campaign that was done. This was done by nonprofits working to change criminal justice, and also people who are formerly incarcerated and directly impacted families. And these are not groups and individuals that are usually rolling in cash. So there wasn't a lot of financial resources in order to educate the people of California. I know when I had the situation, if you'll allow me to go on for a second, where I spoke with people via phone banking or even people I knew in person who weren't entirely convinced when I explained to them that basically what you're doing is you're allowing people to put the humanity element aside, right? But you're basically telling people who are incarcerated that, yes, you cannot go to work, and instead you can actually go to something that will do the whole rehabilitation thing that we're supposed to be doing here. Allowing people to go to school, to get any sort of addiction treatment, to get any number of programs that would allow them to actually have a more excuse me, successful reentry into society and lower recidivism. And I don't think that message got out.
It's unfortunate. I have forgotten the young man's name, but we spoke with a young man the night of the election who said he was one of the principal authors of Proposition 6. I'm not even sure if he was currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated, but what he said stuck with me. He said that he had gone through every possible educational and rehabilitative avenue while he was in prison. He had gotten degrees, gotten certificates, but if he had missed one day of work, all of that good time, all of that, all of that would have been thrown away, and he would have been in jeopardy of having that counted against him for missing one day of work. Whereas
Which is surprising.
you and I, if we miss a day of work, we might not be able to get our annual leave or our sick leave. We might miss 8 hours, possibly kind of, sort of, okay, maybe get fired. I don't know if it would be that deep. But he talked about the fact that if he missed one day of work, everything that he had done and worked for a while behind bars would be wiped away. How? It doesn't get much more punitive than that.
No, and I think what is going on here is we're taking our desire to be punitive, the voters, that is, are taking our desire to be punitive and actually pushing it so excessively that we're actually harming ourselves in doing so.
But I would say that one glimmer of hope, however, is that you state that you think that maybe because of the confusing language and people thought that possibly they were doing the right thing, were voting while voting for it, when in reality there was some confusion, and that's how it ended up passing. That is a slight glimmer of hope. Slightly a glimmer of hope. Are there any opportunities for this to be brought before the populace in California again in the future?
Absolutely. We're going to keep bringing this every single time. We're not stopping. This is a human rights issue, and we're going to keep proceeding with it. So
we just had an election. Between now and the next election, let me ask it this way. Is an election the only way to have this language removed from the California state constitution?
Yes. We need to go through the legislature again, through another, it was previously ACA 3, and then the most recently was ACA 8, and this year it'll have a new number. And once we get through the legislature again, which I'm confident, despite a disappointing election, I'm confident that we can get through the legislature again. And yeah, I'm hoping we're back on the ballot in 2 years.
Okay. I'm speaking with Shayla Wilson and Kelly Walters. We're talking about the recent losses here in the state of California around Prop 36 and Prop 6, the implications of it, and hopefully what we can do in the future. So Shayla, for those of our listeners / viewers who want more information on what it is that La Defensa does, I've had folks on before, but let's tell them again, the work that you all do, how can people keep up with you, follow your work, be involved?
For sure. We're quite active on Instagram, and highly encourage you to follow both or all of our accounts. That includes our primary account, our Reimagine LA account, and the work we do through judicial advocacy. You can, of course, go to our website. We have a number of websites for our Court Watch, Reimagine LA, and again, our primary ladefensa.org website. So highly encourage you to plug into those spaces. We have lots of opportunity for people to be directly engaged and involved in the work we do.
Now, other than the proposition and the judges, the defenders of justice, do you all have any pressing initiatives or campaigns going on right this moment?
I would say, given the impending new president, president-elect, and the impacts we're going to see, particularly in immigration court. We are working diligently to expand our work with Court Watch into immigration courts, and we take and rely heavily on volunteers in the community to come do Court Watch. So if you're passionate about that, I highly encourage you sign up to get a Court Watch training, to participate, to contribute. It's going to be one of the first lines of defense in protecting those individuals and holding judges accountable for the actions they take.
Kelly Walters, Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. How can people stay abreast of the work that you all are doing?
Well, you can also follow us on Instagram. We are listed under our other, it's not an organization, but it's essentially a project that is under LSPC, which is All of Us or None. And that would just be AUOUN, I believe, at Instagram. And sorry, I have to think about it sometimes. And then our website is prisonerswithchildren.org. You can go there. If you have any questions for me, you can find me on there. And don't hesitate to email me. It's Kelly, spelled the way it is on here, KELLIE at prisonerswithchildren.org.
Now, what is All of Us or None, real quick?
All of Us or None is another organization that I keep saying organization, but it doesn't. It's so closely aligned with LSPC. It is a group created and made up of currently and formerly incarcerated people, and there are chapters all over the country. I want to say there's 7 in California, but it extends all the way to the East Coast.
And what does All of Us or None do?
All of Us or None does a lot of demonstrations and policy work. All of Us or None does a little bit of advocacy within the legislature. A lot of the same things that LSPC does, just under a different umbrella.
Okay. And just like I asked with Shayla, does Legal Services for Prisoners with Children have any pressing campaigns or initiatives that they are involved in at this very second? Right now, this very second.
Right now, this very second. Well, I can't necessarily pinpoint because we're still kind of doing our policy for next year. But similar to what Shayla said, with the impending president and essentially just the election itself, even locally speaking, we are going to be taking measures to make sure that the people who have been incarcerated by the state and by the localities are still taken care of. This year, we were able to get them to be able to get CalFresh prior to their exit from the institution. We were also able to, with the Debt Free Justice Coalition, eliminate youth restitution fines. So we're going to continue to push these things. It's just constantly like chipping at a brick wall, and so we're just gonna keep trying to take out that next brick.
Keep chipping away. All right. Shayla Wilson, Kelly Walters, thank you all so much for being on Rootwork today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you are listening to and watching Rootwork here on KPFK 90.7 FM Los Angeles, 98.7 FM Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM San Diego, 99.5 FM Ridgecrest China Lake, streaming at kpfk.org. And if you're joining us from YouTube on the Black Liberation Media platform or the Rootwork channel, welcome. Before I go on to my next guest, I saw a question in the chat. Court Watch. Court watchers are just what they sound like. They are volunteers who watch what happens during bail hearings, take notes, look for anything that might not be right, and report it to the people who can do something about it. They also raise awareness about racial disparities and other injustices in courtrooms that might otherwise go unnoticed. And that's the organization La Defensa, which had the initiative, the Defenders for Justice, to elect judges to the Superior Court who do not come from a carceral prosecutorial background. Okay. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there have been numerous postmortems, think pieces on the recent election, many of which talked about what folks are calling the abandonment of the working class by the Democratic Party. The issue of class antagonisms within the working class as well must also be factored in. I asked Jon Jeter, an award-winning reporter, formerly a bureau chief with the Washington Post, to speak with me about this issue regarding and detailed in his newest book called Class Warfare in America. Here to speak with me now is Jon Jeter. Thank you so much, Jon, for being on Rootwork today.
It is my pleasure, Tennessee's Way.
I enjoy chopping it up with my journalist brother, my brother journalist.
Same here. Same here.
And you have a new book, hot off the press. It's called Class War in America: How the Elites Divide the Nation by Asking, Are you a worker or are you white? Let's talk about this book.
Is that spicy enough for you?
I think it gets right to the point. I think it's got enough hot sauce on it, or cayenne pepper, depending on the audience. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, most definitely spicy. Most definitely spicy. One of the things, well, it's two things. One thing is I remember Robert L. Allen, who many of us love and appreciate, co-founder and editor of The Black Scholar, his important work in the late 60s, Black Awakening in Capitalist America. But I don't believe people talk enough about his other book, Reluctant Reformers, which looks at many of the major movements for social change in this country. And you could say, in terms of the populist movement, for example, economic change, and how they were all derailed by white racism.
That's exactly right.
We need more people to talk about that. The other thing that I think about, what I remember in terms of the beginnings of the Occupy movement, how we go from the battle in Seattle, World Trade Organization, and we come through towards these various Occupy sites throughout the country, New York, LA, etc., and how so many young people who seemingly hadn't been involved in activism before were really attempting to struggle with some of the key questions, but they were stumped in terms of whether or not the police were workers or not, whether or not they were part of that 99% versus the 1%. And as usual, folks of color was like, hey, need to listen to us.
Right.
They're not part of the working class.
Right. Don't trust them. That's exactly right.
And of course they didn't listen to us. But once the hammer came down and, mom and pop with the trust funds got tired of entertaining the children's shenanigans, they called the police to dismantle the encampments. And the youngsters found out whose side the police were really on. So I think about those things every now and again from time to time. Your book asking the question, how the elites divide the nation by asking, are you a worker or are you white? Are they asking a question? Are they making a statement? Is it public policy? What's going on? Speak to our audience.
That's a great way to phrase that question. I would say that at different times they have asked the question. I would say now, in the present day, they demand an answer. They demand of whites that they be white, that they distance themselves from us when it's necessary. I'm not sure it's even all that necessary at this point, because it is really a form of mind control, right? They have, what is the woman who wrote The End of Bias, Jessica Nordell, I think. I put this in the book, where she says, a lie repeated often enough does not become the truth, it becomes invisible. And that's what race has become, right? This idea of a white identity, of a racialized identity, of a white identity being a thing apart from the rest of it. It is basically invented, the white identity, to be a scab, right? To not join with particularly Black people, but also other people of color, in movements against the bosses, the oligarchs, the 1%, whatever you want to call them. And you raised such a great point by talking about Occupy. Occupy was really when I first started thinking about this idea of class in that moment when Obama was first elected. And I write about this at length in the book about I'm not from Chicago, but I've lived in Chicago at various times. I know the story of Harold Washington. Harold Washington, the first Black mayor of Chicago, which is a city that has never been predominantly Black. It was basically roughly a third white, a third Black, a third Latino. And Harold Washington, borrowing from Fred Hampton's Rainbow Coalition, although there were really very few whites, at least initially, managed to become the first Black mayor of Chicago, basically as a response to a Democratic Party that had failed the Black community time and time again, even though the Black community in Chicago was the biggest constituency of the Democratic Party machine, led first by Boss Daley and then later by his son. Blacks were the biggest constituency. In 1982, a Black journalist named Lou Palmer decided to organize some Black working class people, police and union members, rank and file city workers, things like that. And they tried to figure out how do we get what we need for our community in terms of economic development, the trash picked up, just a city hall that listens, that responds to our needs. And they came up with the idea of Harold Washington. And they got him elected. He served basically 5 years, then he dropped dead of a heart attack. But in that time, he had become the most transformative mayor. Well, I would argue he was on his way to becoming the most transformative mayor of the 20th century, probably at his death, even though he only served 5 years. He's probably second only to Marion Barry in Washington, D.C. And so I was very suspicious of Obama during that period when he came up. And I write about this at length in the book, how he was really created by the oligarchs, particularly in Chicago, or beginning with Chicago, as a response to the Harold Washingtons and Marion Barrys of this world. And so in that period is when I first started to grapple with this issue of race and class, right? How do they intersect? What's more important, right? And now, I started writing this book really in my head, probably 2009. And over that period of time, this issue now we see it, people talk about race and class reductionism and what's more important, race or class. And my book is to say that you can't really parse the two. The point is that race is used to divide the working class. In other words, we are many and they are few. And the few have strategized that you can weaken the opposition by polarizing them, by pitting them against one another. That's the purpose, the utilitarian purpose that race serves in this country. And so Occupy, I was in New York when Occupy formed. And again, this is part of my education. It took me basically 15 years, about a quarter of my life to actually write this book, to finish writing this book, almost a quarter of my life. And I, in a way, I'm glad, because there are a lot of things I discovered that I didn't know when I first set out to write the book. One of them was looking at Occupy. And I went to a lot of their rallies in New York City. And one of the things they struggled with, and I will give them credit because they were mostly kids in the Ivy League, or they were led by kids in the Ivy League, young people in the Ivy League. I don't want to be dismissive, young people, and they were black and white, white and black mostly, people mixed race, things like that. People who could have been like Obama's children, and they knew that they needed grassroots support. They needed to expand the movement. They needed to reach out to the working class brothers, poor brothers and sisters. And we've grown so far apart since Robert Allen wrote Awakenings in Black America over the last 50 years, basically. We've grown so far apart. They just didn't know how to do it. They didn't know, I mean this in a philosophical sense, they didn't know where to find us. They didn't know how to communicate with us. They didn't know how to, reach out to us. And so that's the moment we're in now, I think. Although, as I write in the book, I do feel cautiously, not optimistic, but hopeful, if people understand the difference. Because historically, we saw this in the 30s with the Scottsboro movement, the Scottsboro Boys, which are 9 black teenagers who were arrested for falsely raping, sexually assaulting 2 white sex workers. And that sparked the New Deal, really, the labor organizing, which was very integrated, deliberately integrated. And so the Scottsboro Boys became an international cause célèbre all across the world. And it was led by the communists and Black Americans, very, very specifically. And that movement intersected with labor organizing and affordable housing and police brutality and all these issues which
if you don't stop hitting that table and making that noise,
I'm sorry.
I don't know what I'm going to do. Okay, now go ahead.
I'm sorry. You make me nervous. And so And so that moment in time where the Scottsboro Boys led to other movements, right, in the United States, it modernized the country, and it led to the Civil Rights Movement, and then, of course, the Black Power Movement. Mm-hmm. I see the potential for the anti-genocidal protests in Gaza, or against anti-genocide movement, the protests, particularly on college campuses. I see that could do the same thing. It could expand and reach into other protests. We're already seeing it in Atlanta with cop cities, where the anti-genocidal protests have intersected a little bit with the anti-cop city movement. And the reason that is so powerful is because what it does is it's what we see is a weakening of white identity, of a Zionist identity, right? Because Jews are very vital to these anti-genocidal protests. And what that augurs is anti-Zionist, yes, anti-Zionist Jews, yes. Yeah, exactly. It's not about Jews; it's about Zionists. Some of whom are Jews. But we see that sort of resurfacing of a Jewish identity. I talk a lot about this in the book, of a Jewish identity. The Jews historically believe they have an obligation to heal the world. The Zionists are here to steal the world. They are white settlers, right? And so what we see is people reclaiming. There are always Jews who are well-meaning and who have this sort of historical Jewish identity, which is to express our solidarity with other racialized groups especially. But now we see people reclaiming it and strengthening that identity. And there's a potential, particularly when you look at a lot of these Latinos who are coming post-NAFTA, Venezuela, Mexico. They have been radicalized as well by the land struggles in Oaxaca in Mexico, and by the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. And so, again, I'm not predicting this. I'm saying there's a potential for them to glom onto these very organic movements in the Black community, right? Chicago. I'm very hopeful about what's going to happen there as you see these new immigrants coming into the city. There is xenophobia in our community. I mean, I claim the good and the bad, but there's also a historical consciousness of people being pitted against each other and none of us getting what we need. So, and I'll give you just one example of what I mean about the hopefulness. When there was the leak 2 years ago, the LA City Council, the Latino members, the president of the city council was named Nuri Martinez, I think, and the other council members, Latinos, and the labor leader. And the leak of that tape, they're talking about redistricting, and they're talking about it in very racist terms. They attacked everyone, but of course they attacked Blacks most of all. That was where Nuri Martinez expressed her ambition to commit violence against a 2-year-old Black boy who was the adopted son of one of the other councilmen. And at that time, I think Kevin DeLeon, did he lose in this?
Yes, he did.
Yeah, thank goodness. Anyway, he didn't resign, and so there were protests led by Black Lives Matter outside his home.
Right.
Apparently, he lives in a Latino neighborhood. Latinos came out to oppose, to protest, to defend him, right? And from what I think was the LA Examiner, it's the Black newspaper out there, right?
No,
they wrote
Sentinel.
The Sentinel, that must have been it. Yeah, the Sentinel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they wrote that the Latinos talked to the Black Lives Matter protesters, asked them, "Why are you doing this?" Right, and the Black Lives Matter protesters explained it to them. Right, they weren't marching against Kevin DeLeon because he was Latino. They were marching against him because he was racist. He expressed ideals that were anti-democratic. The Latinos switched sides and joined the Black protesters, the Black Lives Matter protesters, protesting DeLeon, one of their own. That is the potential right now. It could go a whole nother way, but I'm saying that, I wrote this book and I ended it, I hope, on a hopeful note, to express, as long as there's breath in our bodies, we have hope, we have a chance. I do believe that's true. These are probably going to be some very dark days ahead, but hopefully we can regroup and recover and learn from our mistakes in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, learn from our mistakes, regroup, and hopefully this is the real hope. This is what I really hope is the objective. What happens after all the smoke is cleared is that we finally achieve what Fred Hampton said when he meant by saying Black power for Black people, white power for white people. I'll say brown power for brown people, and X power for all people we left out. We need power over our own community. We need it. Black people do, African Americans. White people need power over their own community. We need power over our own community, but we need to own and control our own community. That's what's missing from our democracy, and particularly when it comes to Black people. This country is organized around the suffering of Black people. White people know they're doing well when Black people are doing bad. That's why they're so confused now. Black people are doing bad, but they're not doing that much better. And that's very confusing. So hopefully we can regroup, we can reorganize, and we can learn from the mistakes that we made in the past, and we can move forward in a way where we truly have a rainbow nation, a racial democracy. That's why I talk about the fight between racial democracy and racial capitalism. That's been the fight. Racial capitalism has been winning for the last 50 years. Racial democracy had been winning for the 50 years previous to that. Hopefully this is the dawn of a new era, and hopefully it will be stronger than any period of racial democracy that we've ever seen before.
I'm speaking with Jon Jeter. He is a journalist and author. His newest book is Class War in America by Drum Press, available wherever fine books are sold. But I wanted to go back real quick. You said, or we said how the elites divide the nation by asking, are you a worker or are you white? That is the subtitle of the book. And I'm thinking about W.B. Du Bois. I call him Du Bois. Everybody else calls him Du Bois. Okay. I'm thinking about W.B. and his magnificent work, Black Reconstruction in America. Mm-hmm. I'm not thinking about necessarily how he talked about the dividing issue, the issue of the 20th century being the color line. I'm thinking about how he talks about the psychological wage that white workers are paid, the investment in whiteness. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking about, is it that the working class has been divided, or that white folks have accepted white supremacy, benefit from it, invest in it, and have divided themselves from Black workers and other workers? Mm-hmm. Similar to what I believe, well, what I took away from Robert L. Allen's book. Is it the working class is being divided by the elites and the capitalist class and the management and the bosses, or the white workers are, no, we're white and we don't want to be them?
That's right.
In other words, how much responsibility do white workers have in this?
Oh, I think that the entire enterprise, the civic project in America pivots on a white identity, whether they choose it or reject it, right? In those moments when when a critical mass of whites has rejected it, the country moves forward.
I done told you about that noise now.
Oh, sorry, yeah. At those critical moments in our history when whites reject the white identity, when they claim a working class identity, when they express solidarity with Black people and other racialized groups, they become, as I think Fanon said, or the communists say, a new man, a new woman, right? And you can see that. I talk about that in the book. A woman who I think was Flint, Michigan during the great General Motors UAW strike, United Auto Workers strike of General Motors. She talks about the strike and how it opened her eyes to being a different kind of person. She wasn't content to be just a housewife or a mother. She wanted to be part of this community, and that's what thinking of yourself as a worker. That's what it does. And so we see, even for instance, that there is. Even it's not just the racial barriers that are transcended, but even the gender barriers become transcended. I mean, it's never been a utopia, of course, right? Mm-hmm. But we start to ask these questions. What are our responsibilities as a man to women if she's another worker, right? She's not just someone to be subjugated and exploited, but she's a fellow worker. It's a very different conversation, and so this thing pivots. I mean, this is uncomfortable, and I know this is uncomfortable. I felt the discomfort as I was writing it, but it is. Part of the question that has come up, I think, particularly since Obama, is whether this is primarily a class issue or a race issue, right? And again, you can't even talk about class without talking about race, because whites feel entitled, right? They base their the success, whether or not the success, based on how Blacks are doing, right? If Blacks are, they are very threatened. One of the things I write about in the book is how the race, the massacre, they call them race riots, but they're not riots, they're racial massacres when whites want to kill Blacks. They're sparked, particularly the Red Summer of 1919, they're sparked by a combination of economic precariousness, right? A precariousness in terms of the labor organizing. The country was industrializing, jobs didn't pay much. They were trying to organize in the unions. They couldn't really do it because they were segregated. So the bosses pitted one union against another, Black union against the white one against the Black ones whenever they went on strike. And then there's this loudening demand by Black people for justice, to get what we have earned, right? For reparations, in 1919, you saw this loudening demand for justice. Black men were returning from the First World War, and they came back with an attitude, right? They had bad or good intentions, depending on how you look at it. So that's what caused this nationwide uprising by white people trying to reassert their white identity. So this thing turns on, are you a worker or are you white? The Black middle class is blameless in the failures of this country. At every juncture, we have articulated for universal programs. Black people did not want, in the 1970s, we did not want affirmative action. What we wanted was a universal jobs program that benefited everyone. That was Richard Nixon who wanted affirmative action, because he wanted to split Black and white working class, particularly the unions, right? Now we do, I think there is a demand for reparations, and I think rightly so. And I do think that is race specific, but I think a lot of us, certainly I do, I think that it should be something that's class-based, where we put economic development, like I don't think it should be a check, right, drawn on the Treasury, which poor and working class white people have to pay that. It should be, and I don't talk about this in the book, although it's going to be a future book, I do believe. I think that the reparation should be seen as the means of ownership of our community, right, of the development. We should have worker co-ops and land trusts and housing trusts, and we should have worker co-ops, particularly in places like Detroit and Chicago, where you have all these empty, vacant businesses, particularly factories, industrial sites. We should make those places where we manufacture things. We manufacture them for the benefit of the whole nation. The money, of course, goes into the Black community and stays in the Black community, right? We can revive the Freedmen's Bank, right? And the Freedmen's Bank can give low interest loans to all sorts of student borrowers, not just Black but white, right? Low interest, right? These are the kind of things that help to move America forward, to modernize us, to repair us, and to make Black people. And we always have been this, right? I know this makes a lot of people angry, but this is just the truth, right? We can't negotiate the truth. We have always been the source of America's salvation. And it's just true, right? It is.
Good or bad.
Well, and I don't mean the Obamas and the Kamala Harrises of the world. I'm talking about the Black working class and people like that. We are the ones. The LGBTQ community. They many of them, rightfully so, they give credit to the Black Panthers and to the Black freedom struggle in the 60s for making them understand. We've got a stake in this country too. We need to be respected and treated, right? Even a Zionist group, I think they were called the Zionist Panthers, that emerged in the 60s, modeled after the Black Panthers, and they were asserting their rights as Israelis, which is ludicrous, of course, but still, it's the moral center of this country. This idea, Africans are about community. We just are, and then there are all the things that are attendant to that, right? And I'll just give you one quick example. One thing I write about is the 1946 general strike in Oakland, which was the last really organized general strike in this country. And I write about how it becomes something more than a labor event when Black people start singing, right? And so they outlawed the general strike the next year with the Taft-Hartley Act, right? They outlawed several things, but the general strike was one thing they outlawed. And the reason they did that, I believe, general strikes can lead to a sit-down strike and maybe questions from workers about, well, what do we need the bosses for anyway, right? It can lead to a 1917 Bolshevik-like revolution. I think that's what they're thinking anyway. But there's also just this idea of Black people singing. We talked about Occupy, and I quote this young man in New York talking about when the police basically they did this kettle move with all the Occupy protesters in New York City and basically locked them all up. He talked about how it didn't even matter, right? People were so united, black and white, Muslim, and everything else, right? They were united, and they were singing, right? He said nothing even mattered, right? The people were just present in that moment, and we knew who the enemy was. They fear that. They won't admit that, but they really fear that black voice and that momentum that we imbue in almost everything we touch.
I am running out of time. And
Aren't we all?
I knew this was going to happen, but it is just further confirmation that I'm going to have you back on, and we are going to talk longer and more fuller, because I had a critical question I wanted to ask you, but we're not going to get to it today. How can the audience, the listening and viewing audience, how can they track you down? How can they find you? Information on what it is, what other projects you currently have, as well as where to get your book. Let us know that.
I am on Amazon for my book. I know people find that distasteful, but I'm in Amazon. I'm working to get in some bookstores now. I can be found at my books on Class 1 Amerikkka. I am also the owner of Drum Publishing, Drum Press. You can find me at drumpublishing.com. I write for Black Agenda Report, usually once a week or so. You can find my writings on Black Agenda Report. I'm also on Patreon. And so I can be found in a lot of disparate places. I hope people enjoy my work.
Jon, I have enjoyed talking with you today. We have scratched the surface. Sometimes, that'll backfire, but it just has given me more inspiration. We have got to, it's taken us too long to talk as it is. So we have got to talk again.
We are hardworking broke people. So yeah, it takes us, it's hard for us to find the time to talk.
Because we hardworking, broke folks.
Right.
Jon Jeter, thank you so much for being on Rootwork today.
Thank you for having me.
I got to get up out of here. I got to go. So many mucho thanks to GB, Gangsta Boogie, Gary Baca on the boards. Thank you to my guests, Shayla Wilson of La Defensa and Kelly Waters of Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. Thank you for tuning in on KPFK and Black Liberation Media. I may or may not holler at y'all next Thursday. Thanksgiving Day. Depends on how I'm feeling, so we'll see. But until the next time, take care. Stay safe out there. Peace.